on 7 News. This is a Call 7 Investigators special presentation. A wild shootout in Texas. A dangerous parolee wanted for 2 murders dead.
RP is saying that somebody rang the doorbell, the husband answered and was shot.
I just want the answers of why this happened and why nobody looked into it.
How did Evan Ebel, a violent career criminal, drop off the radar?
There has to be something done different so some other family doesn't lose their Nate, because we lost ours.
Tonight, Call 7 investigator Teresa Marchetta getting answers from the state's top prison officials. Uncovering a catastrophic failure in the Division of Parole, putting everyone in Colorado at risk.
I know who the parole officer who was responsible.
Turn off the cameras.
Tracking danger, Colorado's failing parole system.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Call 7 investigator Teresa Marchetta. This is where we expect to find convicted felons behind bars in a secure facility. And when they walk out of here, we expect our state parole system to keep us safe while they restart their lives. But that didn't happen with Evan Ebel, a dangerous parolee on the run, an absconder who had the time and opportunity to commit 2 murders when the state should have known his every move. And that's the focus of this special Call 7 investigation. How does a career criminal, among the most highly supervised in the state, not only commit murder twice, but kill the head of the prison system itself? What we uncovered is both frightening and infuriating. A series of errors, a lack of accountability, and a system that puts you at risk. Nate Leon, tech worker and part-time pizza delivery driver. Tom Clements, head of Colorado's Department of Corrections. 2 husbands, fathers who never knew each other. Their murders just days apart. Sucked into a sickening chain of events we found could have been prevented. The Call 7 investigators obtaining this timeline from the Department of Corrections shortly after the murders, documenting Evan Ebel's brief parole history. For 6 weeks, he was, in the DOC's words, a model parolee. But that would change March 14th. Ebel makes his required morning phone call to check in, but just 6 hours later, the first red flag, a tamper alert on his electronic ankle monitor. It's either broken or cut off. That same night, a second red flag. The model parolee misses his evening phone call check-in. All these alerts sent to his parole officer and others. Alerts that should have triggered immediate action. But it wasn't until March 18th, another 3 days of missed phone calls and alerts later, that anyone in parole called Ebel's family. By then, delivery driver Nate Leon had been murdered for his uniform. But it doesn't stop there. On the 19th, parole officers finally visit Ebel's home and determine he is likely an absconder, but no one suspects him in Leon's murder. On that same day, Ebel, wearing Leon's uniform, guns down DOC Director Tom Clements at his front door. Finally, on March 20th, a warrant is issued for Ebel for violating parole, 6 full days after the first alerts were issued. We uncovered something that makes that gap in response time even more egregious. The DOC classified Ebel as high risk, and I've learned his parole officer was a member of the elite gang unit, carrying a lighter caseload for the sole purpose of monitoring Ebel and those like him more closely. But it was only after our story aired, the DOC created a policy requiring officers to respond to those tamper alerts within 2 hours. And one reason the DOC says Ebel slipped through the cracks, parole officers burdened with heavy caseloads. Yet we learned those same officers were being assigned overtime working security, a decision the DOC reversed after our investigation exposed the contradiction. This pattern evolved. We expose concerns, the DOC makes changes, and the more questions we ask, the clearer it becomes Evan Ebel's case isn't an anomaly. Parolees off the grid, potentially reoffending. Up next, the DOC ramps up efforts to find them. We're embedded with parole officers to see what makes these operations so dangerous and why more are needed.
I mean, what do I tell my kids? Oh, yeah, Daddy was murdered because somebody didn't do their job.
A family torn apart. We talk with Nate Leon's family about what we've uncovered and their unanswered questions about how a parolee was able to commit murder. But first, a Call 7 investigators exclusive. My interview with a parole officer who reveals we're not getting the whole truth about the parole division and how it works. Their job is to protect you from dangerous felons on parole. But with Evan Ebel, that didn't happen. We heard a lot of excuses from the DOC about why parole officers couldn't look for Ebel when he went off the grid, ultimately murdering 2 men. But within weeks, the DOC ramps up efforts to find absconders. 7 News reporter Marshall Zellinger embedded with officers on a parolee roundup.
It's the late-night door knock no one inside is expecting. 7 News asked and was granted exclusive access.
You know what we're dealing with here? These are all gang members. Just be smart, be safe.
Parole officers teaming up to track down and arrest missing parolees, wearing bulletproof vests, armed with guns, and less lethal weapons.
I'm making entry right now.
Even if they catch the absconder, like this one, Jeffrey Sheehan, 7 News finding out it may not mean extra punishment from the parole board.
They may not get 1 extra day for disappearing. What's the motivation?
Well, the motivation is hopefully preventing them from committing any new crimes while they are out of supervision or unaccounted for.
Before officers can even go door to door,
This is going to be at his mama's house.
they spend hours putting together comprehensive files on each missing parolee.
We have a checkpoint probably of 10 or 15 different things that we want to put on a list, a visitor's list of who visited them in prison.
Hours of paperwork on dozens of missing offenders, trying to figure out where they might be hiding.
When people don't want to be found, it's hard to find. Eventually, they run out of places to hide.
I asked why Evan Ebel was not wearing a GPS monitor. I was told because of cost, those are reserved strictly for sex offenders on parole. Today, there are still hundreds of missing parolees. I checked. Look at this. The absconders or missing parolees, as of the end of May, total nearly 700.
Several of my sources within the DOC share deep concerns about their agency. One parole officer risked his job to sit down with me, one of several who say they feel scapegoated by the DOC.
You got parolees out there doing bad stuff, but after your story airs, what are they doing? They're going in taking computers out of people's offices, seeing who's talking to you. When you got people out there tested positive for drugs, going out there absconding parole daily, why aren't they out there using that effort to track these guys down?
This parole officer, who asked us to conceal his identity for fear of losing his job, says the Call 7 investigators haven't been getting the whole truth about Colorado's parole division. For starters, about the number of parolees on their caseloads.
And so every parole officer out there carries a caseload of both ISP and regular parole of about 80 to 100 people.
Wait a minute. So we were told that the average parole officer has about 50.
That is a complete lie. I guarantee you the cases are a lot higher than that. Who's ever telling you that is a bold-faced lie.
Well, the DOC's telling us that.
Well, the DOC's bold-faced lying to you then. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Evan Ebel because I think this goes deeper than that case. But what I will talk about is the fact that the officer that did this, who was his parole officer, is a very, very good officer. He did the very best that he could do with what he was given.
One weakness, he says, basic resources parole officers rely on every day in the field to do their jobs.
The day I signed up for the job, they gave me a badge, a cell phone, 1 pair of handcuffs, 1 little can of OC spray, 2 extra magazines, and said, go do work now. I am wearing an expired vest that's been expired for 5 years now.
And the DOC knows this?
The DOC knows this. It's been brought up. Give me a radio. I can't even call for backup.
And the state vehicles parole officers are assigned? No computers, no radios, no added equipment to keep officers safe when transporting parolees.
They give you no lights and sirens in these cars. They give you no cages in these cars. We have very few that have cages.
When you stand back and you look at this, would you call this a crisis?
It's an emergency crisis and we need to fix it.
The issue of overtime, another sore spot he says the DOC isn't being upfront about. Parole officers work a flexible schedule, but it has to add up to 160 hours a month.
If we work anything over 160 hours, we get written up.
This is important because he says this is the situation Ebel's parole officer was in when Ebel absconded, going days before anyone from parole started looking for him.
What do you do if you're out of hours?
You panic because you know you're going to get written up. You're going to catch 22.
So those supervisors who are in those roles are not going to pick up the slack. Is that what I'm hearing? They're not going to get your back if you're out of hours and you've got alerts going off?
In my personal opinion, no. They're not going to answer their phone on their weekend. There's just no accountability. It's absurd.
I mean, do you think we've been lucky that there haven't been more incidents like what we saw with Evan Ebel?
Extremely lucky. And I'm going to tell you right now, if this system doesn't get fixed, you're going to see a lot more of it, and fast.
Since we exposed the officers' concerns, the DOC again has taken action, promising to address the problems we uncovered, confirming the purchase of new tasers, radios, and holsters. Parole managers are still surveying officers about the bulletproof vests and are also looking into updated safety equipment for their vehicles. Changes underway as our investigations continue, but what we haven't seen is anyone being held accountable for the deaths of 2 men on Parole's watch. Next, putting the tough questions to the head of Parole, Director Tim Hand. His surprising inability to be specific about what officers are required to do as we obtain exclusive documents breaking down where Ebel's parole officer was while Ebel was committing murder.
I wanted big letters. Nathan, Colin, Leon. The loving husband and father. The 27-year-old man that got murdered for a t-shirt.
Our heart-wrenching interview with the Leon family, their reaction when we reveal what we've uncovered about the oversights in parole in the days and hours leading up to Nate Leon's murder. Welcome back. It's clear from documents we obtained from the Department of Corrections in the days following parolee Evan Ebel's murder spree, something went terribly wrong, but so far, no one's been held accountable. I asked the head of parole about his department's failure to protect citizens from the state's most dangerous criminals. Were Tom Clements' employees asleep at the wheel when he was murdered? Where was the accountability?
Teresa, we're not going there. We're not talking about the Ebel case any more than what's in there.
Department of Corrections employees trying to shut down our questions, even though they directly relate to this timeline they released.
Fortunately, the CY system is able to chronological record all contacts with our offenders.
Parolees like Ebel are required to check into CYs. If they fail to do so, their community parole officer, or CPO, receives an alert. We asked Parole Director Tim Hand several times if a CPO is required to check CYs and respond to those alerts.
How often are the CPOs supposed to check in with CYs?
The CPOs check in with CYs on a fairly frequent basis.
We found when Ebel was breaking the terms of his parole, there was no requirement for Ebel's parole officer to check the system. No requirement for him to respond as the alerts from CYs were being sent. Even more concerning, DOC sources confirm Ebel's officer, whose name we're withholding, is a member of a specialized gang unit. Elite officers assigned to the most dangerous parolees.
Do they have special training, lighter caseloads? Are they paid more?
Sure, they do have special training. I think that they work very closely with local law enforcement agencies around gang-related issues.
I'm trying to understand what the difference is between a gang unit CPO and a regular CPO if the response time doesn't seem any faster.
We've gone there. We've gone there. We said we didn't have a policy, we have one now. We've gone there.
We haven't gone there, Allison, because you said that the CPOs all had, if you want to put a mic on, we can interview you too. You said the CPOs had about 50 each parolees, and that's not the case.
Spokeswoman Allison Morgan, again off camera, told reporters last month CPOs were overburdened, carrying heavy caseloads. But Department of Corrections documents obtained by the Call 7 investigators show gang unit officers have just 20 to 30 parolees, half the load of other CPOs, some of whom monitor 60 or more parolees.
There were other cases of greater importance that he was working on at that point.
But by the looks of his time card given to us by the DOC at our request, he wasn't that busy. Ebel's parole officer worked a full day Thursday, March 14th, the day Ebel's first tamper alert and missed call occurred. The next day, Friday, the officer takes off early, just 3 hours on the job. Meanwhile, Ebel's still missing call-ins and ignoring alerts to repair his ankle monitor. The officer takes Saturday off. Ebel, an absconder, still on the run, but parole doesn't know it. Sunday, pizza delivery driver Nate Leon disappears. Ebel's officer again takes the day off. Monday, the 18th, the officer works a half day. Parole reaches out to Ebel's family for the first time. Tuesday, Ebel's parole officer works 9.5 hours, searching Ebel's house, finally declaring him an absconder. Within hours, Ebelwood police say gunned down his CPO's boss, Tom Clements.
We have a number of individuals that are high risk and gang affiliated.
There were critical mistakes here, critical oversights, if you will. just by the documentation that you put out.
But the failure didn't stop with Ebel's parole officer. I've learned there's an extensive chain of command, a backup system. That document obtained by the Call 7 investigators shows Ebel's gang unit officer had 2 backups assigned to him. He also has a team leader, a supervisor, a manager, an assistant director, and a director.
Where were all those checks and balances on this week? Have you held people accountable for those events of that week?
Well, we will hold our staff accountable once we get an opportunity to really examine everything that's being questioned right now.
We got strong reaction to this interview. 18th Judicial District Attorney George Brockler started reviewing cases after we showed him the timeline of parole events in the Evan Ebel case.
And we uncovered cases where there were parolees who had been able to abscond, and during the period of time that they had absconded, committed new crimes, vicious crimes, while they were not being monitored or actively tracked by parole.
Brockler tells me prosecutors factor in parole time during sentencing, and he says what we uncover has prosecutors wondering if they should ask for longer sentences. After our story aired, we learned Tim Hand had been placed on administrative leave, but just as the DOC was showing him the door, a new contradiction from the agency. They booked him a plane ticket to an out-of-state parole meeting. The Call 7 investigators' cameras are there as Hand attends that meeting in Indianapolis, all while on a required leave of absence, a violation of this administrative regulation signed by former DOC Director Tom Clements, which says anyone on administrative leave shouldn't be working at all, let alone traveling out of state.
Well, I don't think I've done a poor job recently. I think that's an opinion you might have. I think that the entire division is being looked at.
Just one day after that interview in Indiana, my sources confirm Hand was fired. His last day on the job, June 30th, a decision I've learned was not mutual, but made by interim DOC Director Roger Warholtz. As we learned from the failures of Colorado's parole system, we cannot lose sight of the human tragedies they caused. The family of Nate Leon sitting down exclusively with 7 News to share their pain and confusion. How a man working hard for his family became the victim of a violent criminal the state was supposed to be watching.
I went through a cycle. It's been shock, and then there's the sadness. I've cried every day.
Katie Leon wants answers, and her questions are the same ones we've been asking the Department of Corrections for months. I wanted big letters. Nathan, Colin, Leon.
That's what you're going to
The loving husband and father. The 27-year-old man that got murdered for a t-shirt.
It's been 3 months since Nate Leon, devoted husband and father, was murdered.
No matter how tired he was, he would come home. And he would walk right in that door and say, "Hello, my little ladies." And my kids would come running.
Explaining to her 40-year-old twins why Daddy won't be walking through the door anymore has been a source of daily torture for Katie Leon.
That is the only reason I get up every morning. That is the only thing I have left of my husband, that are the spitting image of their daddy.
Nate's full-time job was with IBM.
I kept telling him that he didn't need to work at Domino's, and he kept telling me, "No, baby, we need the extra money." I begged him for years to quit it.
But on March 17th, Nate never made it home for the St. Patrick's Day celebration they had planned.
I just want the answers of why this happened and why nobody looked into it. Why it took him 4 days after he cut off his bracelet for somebody to go check his house when they should have been there within 30 minutes.
The anger, the errors, the coulda, woulda, shoulda that would have kept him here.
I showed Katie and her mom what we uncovered. The parole division admitting there were no policies in place for responding to alerts prior to the murders.
We've never heard this.
And that Ebel was flagged for intensive supervised probation, even assigned a gang unit officer with a smaller caseload for closer supervision.
And you hear this timeline of events.
Anger. Lots and lots of anger when I hear that.
Makes me sick. This could have been prevented.
Leon's mother-in-law upset by the glaring lack of accountability.
Yes, there were mistakes made. Oh, really? But those mistakes took her husband, my son-in-law, my grandchildren's dad. Who's going to stand up and say they're sorry?
Katie, has anyone been held accountable in your mind? And if not, who should be?
Anybody that had to do with Evan Ebel, anybody that had their name tied to him should be held accountable.
There has to be something done different so some other family doesn't lose their Nate, because we lost ours.
Everybody's just stood in the shadows since all this happened. You know, why is it my family in mourning has to stand here in front of cameras and beg them, have to beg them to come to us? That's not right. It's not right. I mean, what do I tell my kids? Oh yeah, you know, Daddy was murdered because somebody didn't do their job.
A lack of accountability at the Department of Corrections Parole Division. Parole officers ignoring critical alerts from high-risk parolees. A division sending mixed messages about the consequences of a series of mistakes resulting in the deaths of 2 men, including their own prison's chief. Our investigations are leading to meaningful changes. Hopefully, an audit of the Parole Division currently underway will lead to the DOC living up to its motto, building a safer Colorado for today and tomorrow.